Stop the insanity. Get focused on what really matters in life. Your faith, your family, your finances, and your future. Now sit back and change the trajectory of your life. This is Money for Life, brought to you by the 100-Year Savings Solution. Are you concerned about the markets? Stop taking unnecessary risks with your money while also getting great benefits. Visit us at 100yearsavings.com. Now, let's welcome your Money for Life hosts, Teresa Kuhn and Rick Sapio.
Hello, everybody. This is Teresa Kuhn with my partner, Rick Sapio, and Money for Life. And today we're going to talk about a concept called Cathedral Thinking. And it's something that I learned about 3 or 4 years ago and absolutely love it. And we hope you enjoy learning about this phrase today. So what exactly is cathedral thinking? Well, let me pose it to you in a question. What is it that you think you could do in your life today that you would get no benefit, absolutely no benefit out of it, but future generations would? One of my mentors, Nelson Nash, very close dear friend of mine, was a forester. And if you know anything about forestry, it's about planting seeds for trees that aren't going to mature until 20, 30, 40 years into the future. Imagine being a forester in your 60s or 70s and knowing that the seeds you plant aren't going to bring a harvest during your lifetime. That's just one really simple example of cathedral thinking. And Rick, I know you love this conversation. It's about long-term thinking. Give us a few other examples about cathedral thinking.
Some extreme examples that really make you think about your life and what are you here on this earth for. There are many churches in London that were built with certain wood. And the people that built these churches in the year 1100, 1200, 1300 knew that in 500 years or so, the wood would start deteriorating. So they actually isolated forests in England that were deemed for that wood and that forest to be used 500 years into the future. So imagine if you're that kind of forester where you're saying, look, growing these seedlings here in this little section, it's actually manifested where there are churches that have had the wood deteriorate and they had to go back to that forest that planted trees 500 years ago for that purpose. That's cathedral thinking, and that's where it comes from, actual cathedrals. But think about the scientist who dedicates their entire life to solve a problem, energy, for example, that they know that energy will not be commercially viable for 200 years. There were people that studied hydrogen and electricity before either one of those were seen as energy uses. You think about, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Thomas Edison knew that a lot of his inventions were because of people before him. So here's something to think about with all of you with grandkids and kids. What about committing a portion of your life to unfinished work? Like, what would that be like? I'm going to do something that's half done, and I'm going to pass it on to my child who's going to do a little bit more, and then my grandchild is going to do a little bit more, because that's how it used to be in the old days. When you go back to earlier times, even ancient Rome, people knew that if they were building an aqueduct or if they were building a road, they knew that it was going to take 80 years. But the life expectancy was only 44 years. So they may have worked on something for 20 years, knowing full well that the people that benefit it, or the people that get the benefit of whatever they were working on, could be 4 and 5 generations into the future. And just think about this, Teresa. Long-termism is one of our values. But we live in a world today that if an email doesn't download in quicker than 8 seconds, we're freaked out. How did things change so dramatically?
Well, I guess some would say Moore's Law, how things became, from a technology perspective, faster and smaller and time compressed. And I am one of those people when my email's not working or my internet isn't working fast enough and I'm waiting for a document because I've got a client on the line and I'm a bit impatient. I get it. And it's really interesting as I get older and my son is getting older and I start thinking, which I think is just the natural course of life as we get older, about having grandkids and things that I can do today that can benefit them, like my estate planning and maybe certain property I own. Would my grandchildren enjoy it when I'm not here? It's just fascinating for me to think that way. And also watching my parents age, they're in their 80s, and hearing their conversations around their grandkids and making sure that things are in place so that their grandkids don't forget about them. They're about to be great grandparents. I wonder what they're going to be thinking about with their great grandson. Will their great grandson remember them?
All right, everyone. And now this is a message from our sponsor, the 100-Year Savings Solution. Teresa and I do these podcasts because we are very committed to you having wealth in your life. And that wealth is long-term wealth. And how do you get wealth? You get wealth by employing the barbell investment strategy, in which you focus on creating a foundation of wealth using specially designed whole life insurance from a mutually owned insurance company. And you're going to get higher returns with far less risk. I call it risk-free, but it's far less risk than you can get anywhere else in the world. And once you have that financial foundation set up, the rest of your wealth creation is almost automatic. Go to www.100yearsavings.com. I watched a TED Talk on Cathedral Thinking. Speaker said, Albert Einstein said that if he had 1 hour to solve a problem, he'd spend the first 55 minutes getting the question right. And that way of thinking about thinking and investigating and just having time alone, it's been completely and totally sucked out of society. Every microsecond of our lives is filled with some interruption or some need to stare at a screen or some need to yell at somebody or some need to be upset or offended. And we've talked about this on the podcast, but the average parent has one-on-one conversations, eyeball to eyeball, conversation back and forth with the average child in America for less than 1 minute per day. How sad and sick, and talk about the opposite of cathedral thinking. How sad is that? So I'm not talking about your child is in the back of the car and you're yelling at them. I'm not talking about everybody watching TV together. I'm talking about back and forth dialogue, eyeball to eyeball with no electronics around. It doesn't exist. So the only way that anyone listening to this can embrace cathedral thinking, you have to reorient your life and take complete and total command of your environments everywhere you are. You have to think about it. You have to say, how do I want to live? How do I want my children to live? How do I want my grandchildren to live? Should we have a discussion about it? Let's have a family meeting with cell phones in the trunk of the car, and we're inside the house so nobody's tempted to lose their mind because their cell phone is beeping. We have to take control of who and what gets into our environments.
Rick, we're talking about families, cathedral thinking with families. What about cathedral thinking when it comes to business and impacting the world with ideas and with products and with organizations that can do good in the world? Steve Jobs, in terms of Apple, you can say what you want regarding the electronics, but he built an enduring brand, a concept, an idea that has lived beyond him. What are some other examples, Rick?
I read a book in 1993, I believe, called Built to Last, and it talked about all of the enduring brands that have been around for more than 100 years, that they were founded on the principle of, what do we want to be like in 100 years? And it's because of that question that we actually started the 100-Year Savings Solution. And you and I have written 4 books on 100-year thinking. If you start with the premise that you and your spouse, for example, will be married for a really, really, really long time, you start asking different questions. If we're going to be married for 80 years, what should we be doing now? How should we be handling our health? What toxic things are we going to eliminate from our lives and from our diet? What people do we want to hang out with? Same thing in business. If we're going to be around in 100 years, what type of people do we want to associate with? What kind of partners do we want to have? What type of people do we want to hire? Where do we want to place the company? And it starts changing how you think about things. Cathedral thinking, just like Albert Einstein said, it changes how you react to the questions that are asked of you. So when you ask the question like, what is your mission statement? What are your values? What is your catalyzing statement? I did a TED talk on that. The answers are different when you take a long-term 100-year cathedral thinking perspective.
Rick, you're so right. The 100-year savings solution was informed by the long-term thinking. Going back to my parents and their thinking about, will their grandkids and their great-grandchildren remember them? I've got many clients their age. They are in their 80s. I've got clients in their 70s and 80s, and that is part of their thinking. I think that's just an evolution of getting older and knowing that you've got less time alive than you've lived. And you want your prodigy to remember you. And the 100-year savings solution does such a beautiful job of being an enduring product that can help grandkids and great grandkids to remember you. I'll give you an example. I've got clients that have policies, very specific type of policies that endure, that are designed to last over 100 years. And they say that their grandparents or their parents started those policies for them. And that person may not be alive today, but we're talking about them and they're acknowledging what a beautiful gift it was that this person made for them. And that person is being remembered in our conversation. It's just a beautiful thing, Rick. A beautiful thing. And that's just an example of a seed that's planted. That parent, that grandparent knew that it wasn't there to benefit them. It's been planted to benefit that child for over 100 years.
This is why you and I are so passionate about what we do for a living, especially around the 100-year savings solution. We have a passion around people having a fulfilling life. We actually want people to live their life, not be caught up in drama and toxic situations and chaos, a lot of which happens around their finances and around investing. And the reason why we selected this product was because it allows people to be freed up. It's an enduring product with a long-term time horizon that's been around for more than 160 years without missing a dividend. And that's why we are passionate about it. And if you think about like that part of your life being taken care of, now what? What else do I do with my life? What do I want to build? What cathedral thinking project can I start that will go unfinished in my life? How do I stop worrying about this nonsense? I interviewed a lady today, in fact, very interesting, Teresa. She had a buyout from her company when she was about 50, which was like 7 or 8 years ago, so around the same age. And I said, what do you do with your time now? She goes, oh, I'm obsessed with trading online. And I said, so what do you do with your time? She goes, oh, I read articles about companies and I just trade online. I asked her, how many hours a day do you do it? And she said, 10 hours a day. And I was floored. I said, you trade 10 hours a day? I said, well, how are you doing? She goes, I'm about break even. So you think about 10 hours a day for 7 years and you're broken even? I would call that an addiction. And so I feel like human beings have chosen, for whatever reason, to have screens replace life. And screens have replaced actually embracing our potential, creating new things, inventing things, breathing fresh air, exercising outside, having picnics, walking around the block, you name it. And it's part of what you and I know is we're only talking to a tiny percentage of the population. If you're listening to this podcast, you belong in that tiny percentage of the population that understands we're not going to be every day sitting in the arena or in the Colosseum in Rome eating peanuts or whatever they ate back then, because we're going to be the tiny percentage of the population that is actually making things happen in ancient Rome, not the massive part of the population that gets to live off the efforts of others. So I'll ask you a question, which is based on a prior podcast that Teresa and I did. Are you generating things in your life, making things happen, creating things from nothing, or are you consuming media, consuming news, consuming games, consuming crap? That's the big question.
Such a great conversation and another great podcast. Rick, thank you so much for participating in this conversation. I absolutely love it. And we're not here being preachy saying we're perfect and we do this all the time, right? No, not at all. I'm the first one to say it's not me, but having the conversation keeps it top of mind, keeps us aware. So when those opportunities come to plant a seed for the future, knowing that we're not going to personally benefit from it, that awareness helps keep us on track. And we hope you've enjoyed this podcast as much as we have sharing it with you.
You have just experienced the Money for Life podcast, brought to you by the 100-Year Savings Solution. Implement these strategies today and create a life by design. For more information, visit 100yearsavings.com. Have a blessed day.